Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And I'm joined today by Craig. Craig, can you please introduce yourself and share a little bit about what you do?
Hi, my name is Craig Crisler. I'm CEO of SupportNinja. We are, for lack of a better term, an outsourcing provider focusing primarily
Mhm.
on high growth companies that are scaling quickly, specifically in the tech space.
Tell me a little bit about how you are using generative AI internally. What have you done with it? How have you adopted it? What has been your journey on adoption of this technology?
Absolutely. It's interesting. Prior to starting SupportNinja, I have been working with a startup. We had built a large language model around handwriting. And so, I have some experience working in the AI space and how they're built. And so, when we started to see basically the trend in Gen AI, there's lots of AI out there, but specifically as Gen
Mhm.
AI started to become prevalent, one of the approaches that we had at Support Engine, the way in which we leveraged it was to say our focus will be on how and what ways can we optimize work for our clients versus the way in which we
Mhm.
optimize our own work.
Mhm.
Because we're as an outsourcing partner, we're involved in their CX. And so we want to make sure that whatever we do in terms of deploying tools is that way. So we have a suite of tools that we can deploy, but then we also go and find the best in class solutions and help them integrate within
Mhm.
our clients. And so it's very strategy focused. It's kind of, selecting the right tool first, understanding their processes, their systems, the data that we'll be utilizing in order to make an AI tool work effectively, and then
Mhm.
doing proof of value and then making sure we can show that to our clients.
And so let's talk a little bit about how you overcome some of the challenges that in adopting generative AI to your clients, because of course your clients have some concerns about this adoption, and you're coming in as a third-party provider and you're trying to help them make their decisions, and often you're more technologically savvy than they are. So how do you work with them to overcome the challenges that they can experience in adopting generative AI tools?
Absolutely. We think that, being the partner here, the third party, our main focus is on how and what ways strategically would a tool like AI work within our clients. And that
Mhm.
starts by taking about 5 or 6 steps back from actually deploying a tool. It's
Mhm.
about looking at their processes, understanding the systems, understanding the data and the customer journey that we're potentially deploying tools into, and then identifying areas where we could potentially deploy those tools into the client and
Mhm.
then having conversations with them about it. I think with our clients, what we found is if you start from there, meaning that you're
Mhm.
starting from a place of saying, we understand how you work, the way your data looks, the way in which
Mhm.
the integrations could potentially look, it makes the kind of fear about deploying a tool go down because we've done the
Mhm.
homework to
Mhm.
understand how and what ways AI deployment could work.
Mhm. Now, how mature do you find your clients are about generative AI deployment? Because, of course, companies can be at various levels of maturity. Are you coming in to a company that's just thinking about generative AI, and are you pushing them to adopt it and encouraging them to do so, versus a company that's already adopting its own tools and you're plugging into their tools? Tell me about how you're approaching companies at different levels of generative AI maturity.
Well, in terms of what's interesting about, when you think about generative AI maturity, I always think about like, is it optimally deployed? Meaning that like,
Mhm.
have they deployed it effectively? And I would say for the most part, there's not a ton of folks who have deployed it effectively, meaning that
Mm.
they're still struggling with the implementation and trying to understand the ways in
Yeah.
which it could work well within their systems. That being said, the majority of our folks we want to, and even our state of outsourcing report that just came out at Support Ninja, we
Mhm.
highlighted that, over 40% of folks are actually actively deploying AI tools right now that we
Mhm.
talk to and talking to CX executives. So a good chunk of them are doing it.
Mhm.
But the vast majority of folks that we work with, they want to see if there's ways in which we can look at the work that they're doing and really are asking us for guidance around the ways in which
Mhm.
to deploy it. Um, Sometimes, though, what we've seen is that clients will look at what we'll look at their systems and processes and realize there's a way in which we can make the work that they're doing better by putting in some basic tooling
Yeah.
that will allow it to work better. And oftentimes they're just like, oh, we didn't never thought about doing that. And so
Mm.
we're like, oh, well, let's try it and see if it works. And so I think for the most part, most folks that come to us they're excited about it, but they're
Hmm.
apprehensive about the way in which it
Hmm.
works. I think the biggest hurdle for folks, to be brutally honest, is security.
Hmm.
Understanding, is my data secure? How would it be secured?
Hmm.
And all of that stuff because they think about, all these stories of data getting pumped into a large language model and it
Sure.
being a breach, and all of which is avoidable. It just requires some, extra steps in understanding how the
Hmm.
security compliance works. But I think that's probably the biggest fear for people looking at it.
Hmm.
I will say though that one of the things that we work really heavily on is understanding the CX experience for our clients to make sure
Hmm.
that the tooling doesn't take away from their CX strategy, which
Hmm.
unfortunately we see a lot of that happening in the industry right now.
Hmm. That's interesting. So tell me a little bit more about how you address this misalignment between the tooling and the strategy.
So, one of the things that I'll give you a firm example where, so we had a client, one of our clients, a high-end luxury good, and they had deployed a chatbot to their site.
Hmm.
And it was basically an AI chatbot that was being leveraging a knowledge base and interacting with their potential customers via the website.
Hmm.
The problem was that it was a very high-end luxury good. And so like their average sale size for each transaction was over $10,000.
Hmm.
And so what was happening was their brand voice was getting diluted by this bot
Hmm.
who was giving this very rudimentary
Hmm.
response to these inquiries from these clients who were looking for a very high touch specialized
Hmm.
service. And so what we did is we had a conversation with them and said, is this the kind of experience you want for your clients based on, what your brand is and kind of what your voice will be? And then in digging in, they were like, we really don't. And I said, okay, well, you really want to try to find a way to expedite the information availability to agents who can make it better for your clients who are on the other end. And then it proceeded to implement tooling that would
Hmm.
allow our agents to have more information that could be more helpful to their
Hmm.
clients and speed up the calls and really provide solutions to their clients in a faster manner, which was way more aligned to their brand voice.
Hmm.
And so a lot of it is having that conversation with them and saying, how does your CX look? And if we were to
Hmm.
deploy some tooling, does it make sense? There are absolutely instances where an AI chatbot works fantastically.
Yeah.
Like if it's a very transactional model, like absolutely, it's the best. Reset a
Hmm.
password, those kinds of things all day.
Hmm.
Um, but if what you're trying to do from your customer journey doesn't align with the tooling that you have there, then there's that misalignment, and ultimately the AI just gets a bad name.
Mm, that makes sense. Now, when you're thinking about your clients and trying to help them interact with their own customers, how do you find out what the customers think? Like, what strategies do you use? What's the approach that you take there? Because of
There's a
course, a lot of people are concerned about generative AI usage.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about, so one of the ways that we approach it is we start with the baseline of how are they interacting with their customers now? So we look
Hmm.
at the scripting, we actually use in the background, we have a tool called Ninja AI where we can take the interactions within a client, go through and understand what is the
Hmm.
sentiment that we're seeing within the client's interaction. What's the brand voicing look like? How
Hmm.
and what ways does this support the brand or does it misalign with the brand that the client's trying to portray in a CX journey? And then from there, then we go, okay, well, this is how it's perceived currently. So it's kind of like a current state
Hmm.
analysis to understand where it's at.
Yeah.
And then from there, we journey map it, understanding where the data points are that we need to be able to integrate effectively. And
Hmm.
then we take the step of saying, okay, what could some potential tooling look like? And then what would the outcome be?
Hmm.
So starting with the basis of understanding kind of what is their current state is kind of the first big step for us.
Hmm.
And shockingly, we use generative AI to do it. Like we
Sure.
actually analyze the data that way, and then we dive in once we get the analytics to understand where some of the tooling would potentially work well.
Hmm.
Further, the other aspect of it is we have deep dive conversations with the clients and the customer service teams, and
Hmm.
in some cases, even the engineering teams
Hmm.
because we need to understand how the product is, what
Hmm.
is the product and service that they're offering, how and what ways do they see the value within the
Hmm.
organization, the client and the end user. And from there we can kind of get this really holistic picture. It's interesting how high touch it is, being that we're talking about AI. Um,
Sure.
because it requires quite a bit of human work in order for us to have these conversations with our clients. Because it's funny, the team and I, we always joke, ultimately transactions between from cash being exchanged between a customer and a client is still happening by a human. It's not happening by an agentic agent yet. So we have to make sure that that interaction is as efficient and meaningful to each other, and that co-value creation as it can be once it gets to that point. So that requires humans to be involved and understand it effectively.
That makes a lot of sense. And we're talking here not simply about the technical solution, but about the change management journey, kind of same emotions. Of course, we're talking about some of the clients who might be concerned about generative AI usage, but some of the employees within your client would also be concerned about it. So how do you overcome some of the fears and anxieties that employees within your client might have about generative AI usage? What do you do to address the change management aspects, the fears about job loss, about disruption, about ethics, about bias, about hallucinations? What do you do to help the change management process?
So for Support Ninja, in terms of, because obviously it's a big fear for all the, we call them ninjas. Our agents are all ninjas. Ninjas, 3,000 plus ninjas across the world. They're obviously worried.
Yeah,
Because they, tool deployment could mean job loss to them,
yeah.
perceptually. Like it's not true, but perceptually, that's what they think. One of the first things that we did, and one of the things that we do for everyone that comes on board, is we do AI training, meaning that we make sure
Mm,
everyone understands the way in which Gen AI works, the basics of AI, but then
mm,
also too, like, kind of basic prompt engineering, and then we give them access to tools so they understand what it
mm,
is it actually does. Because I do think kind of the opposite of fear is knowledge, and so in understanding
mm,
and being comfortable with where your current state is, and so them being exposed to it all of a sudden creates really good opportunities for them to have a baseline where we can then build upon to
mm,
help them alleviate that fear. And so they're actually using it and practicing with the tools and being able to understand, oh, okay, well, this is the way in which it makes
mm,
my work potentially better. Um, Now, as far as with the clients and the ways in which we work with them, and even our teams who work directly with clients, once we know we're actually deploying a tool into the
mm,
system, one of the big things that we always are is very transparent about this is a proof of
mm,
value approach. So we
mm,
deploy first, we do a proof of value for 3 to 4 months to try to understand, will this
mm,
deployment work effectively? Because if it doesn't work effectively, then obviously we need to pull it off, take it out. And what's interesting about that approach is that it does
mm,
allow our clients and their counterparts within their own teams and our teams to be able to get comfortable with the concept, but then
mm,
realizing fairly quickly how much human intervention is still needed in a tool in an AI
mm,
deployment. Because even as recently as just this last week, we had a client who had deployed, and and it was actually with another provider. It wasn't with SupportNinja, it was another provider, but they came to us because they wanted us to QA the work that this other provider was doing,
mm,
because the tool was just deployed and there was no back end support, meaning that there wasn't a human
mm,
looking at the interactions to understand if it's working or watching the tooling perform. And one of the things that I talked to that client about is to tell them, saying, like, just remember that as much as we like to think that this will actually create have potentially end up in job loss, what we're finding historically is that you still need a pretty significant back end. You might have
mm,
in particular roles a decrease, but then there's an increase in the ability for us to be able to do higher order work,
mm,
and us to actually drive more value to your customers.
mm,
And it's funny, most of my teams now get really excited about the prospect of AI being deployed, because then they know that it actually allows them to do what I think is more human-based work,
mm,
meaning that they're actually able to do more stuff that allows them to think,
mm,
allows them to kind of build upon the work, be more proactive with the customers, and it frees them up from the mundane tasks of, as
mm.
I keep using the example of a password reset. That is not a
Sure.
very great
Yeah.
use of human time, but it is something in the back end you can actually tool around that will
Mm,
allow them to then ask questions about how is the service performing? How are we doing?
mm.
Which is a much more empathetic and human-like work versus it just being this monotonous, I'm going to keep password resetting for 100 times a day.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, as we finish up, So you're talking not job loss at this stage, but we're seeing more and more agent of AI come up, and that definitely has more prospect for job loss. So as we finish up and you're forecasting the next couple of years out, what are you seeing with the kind of disruptions that generative AI will cause, and how will that impact your business and your clients?
It's interesting because one of the things that we've been working a lot on is kind of an ultimate end game for Support Ninja is that we're actually helping our clients build agentic agents in many
Mhm.
ways
Yeah,
because
makes
the
sense.
requirement for an agentic agent to work really well, and even currently with the rise of NPC and what we're seeing in terms of the ways in which you have to aggregate data in a meaningful
Mhm.
way in order for an agentic agent to be as effective as possible, um, is a lot of what we do at Support Ninja, where we're working with our clients to build these APIs
Mhm.
to kind of get enough set of a data where then you could deploy an agentic agent into it that would allow it to actually think and behave and grow and learn,
Mhm.
to be proactive and do it. And I do think, over time, that will take, quite a bit of time, for folks to get comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Do I think it's 20 years from now? No, I think we're probably in the few years before
Mhm.
it's a little bit more systemic. But we're moving down the path and we're seeing
Mhm.
that there is a state where, for example, even my teams, we may be only handling tier three work with an actual
Mhm.
human, whereas tier one, tier two, and some of that stuff where we're doing, for example, refunds, all of that being completely automated
Mhm.
by an agentic agent. I do see that happening, fairly soon in the future.
Mhm.
Um, but the main thing I would say is, I say this a lot to folks who ask me about AI. I mean, who's going to win? Data is going to win in AI.
Mhm.
Because the more access to data, that the way in which data can be
Mhm.
aggregated allows an agent to work effectively, right?
Yeah.
And so that agentic agent at that point, once it has all the data that it needs, then it's a matter of training and just making sure that it's doing the right actions and training it effectively so it's taking the right next best action. Um, and so I think for us, the way we view it at Support Ninja is that in 3 to 5 years, it's going to be this kind of, shift between as we're deploying AI tooling and the agentic
Mhm.
agents getting smaller, is that there could be a decrease in headcount.
Mhm.
Um, but that will take time and multiple layers of data integration across multiple systems to make it work
Mhm.
the most effectively that it can.
Mhm.
And as a side note to this, one things that we're seeing a lot of is that data teams or IT teams within organizations aren't super ready to have all of this data being aggregated in a centralized
Mhm.
location yet. Their comfort level around it is not where it would need to be for an agentic agent to work effectively.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, Craig. That was very, very helpful.
Oh, it was a great time. I always enjoy talking to you about it.
Excellent. And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps other people discover the show and helps us improve the show. And if you have any questions, email me at gleb, Gleb, at disasteravoidanceexperts.com.